Hey guys, we're doing another topic video. Today I asked you who are your favorite movie villains. So we'll start with the first one. Frank Booth, Blue Velvet. Dennis Hopper is one of my favorite actors and I love the way he delivers this character. Lynch didn't expose his motives, so he seems to be very enigmatic and unpredictable. He's one of those villains I wanted to have a separate movie all about him. Yeah, okay, so I actually disagree with you, and you're kind of contradicting yourself here because you say that he didn't expose his motives and that's what makes him so kind of enigmatic and interesting. So I don't think that would really work making a movie all about him. I don't often like the idea of creating an origin story for a villain. Sometimes it can work, but a lot of times it doesn't, and I think reason why is because characters like Frank Booth, they really act more as an abstraction. What he does is represent all of the weird Freudian and toxic, destructive, violent urges and things that we have within us, but just kind of embodied in a specific character, in a symbol. And with Blue Velvet, that's one of David Lynch's best movies of all time, by far. But it's not so surreal that it's like going into, like Inland Empire territory or Mulholland Drive territory, which is why hiring somebody like Dennis Hopper to stand for a specific type of person in particular, I think really, really works. And yes, Dennis Hopper is an extraordinary actor. He's a terrifying person. Like when I think of people like I just would not want to be alone in a room with, he's definitely one of them. I think a lot of times his persona off screen kind of mars how amazing he was and how many chances he took on screen. And I think, yeah, Frank Booth is one of his crowning achievements as an actor. He just goes so hard and does not care. He's so unleashed. He lets all of the craziness just fly, and it is absolutely terrifying. There's a real terror and kind of brutality to him. And actually, I think one of my favorite moments is, it's a strange moment. It's a scene where Dean Stockwell is lip syncing, and Frank Booth seems really moved by the performance. And it's like the one time we ever see him feel like emotionally connected to something, or one of the few times we do see that. And then suddenly afterwards, his response is to go in and beat someone up, become more violent, as though he's kind of ashamed of that vulnerability. So I think that was very, very telling. But he is certainly one of those people, I can't imagine anyone else playing him, and I think he is also one of those examples of you don't really need to know much about him because you get a really good sense of him right away. But yes, Frank Booth is one of the great villains ever in Hollywood movies. Miss Eleanor Iselin in The Manchurian Candidate. Angela Lansbury's extraordinary performance is so layered and nuanced that it's fascinating to watch, even though she is pure evil. Yeah, okay, so I haven't seen Manchurian Candidate in a really long time, but it's a film that I greatly admire. And I'm talking the original, of course, as are you. Angela Lansbury is, of course, a great actress and a legend in her own right, but with this particular role, I think she really went into dark territory, but in a way that, it's not gimmicky, it's not over the top, it's very subtle, but she has such a strong command. And a lot of it is just kind of through, her enunciation, the way she projects. She is the wife of a political candidate, and yet she is far more imposing and far more of a leader. And to be quite honest, she's more intimidating than pretty much every man in this movie. She is kind of that Shakespearean-esque Macbeth type character where, she's using her power as a woman to gain more power over the men. And she does it in such horrible, horrible ways, using her own son and her husband to gain power. And I think it's an example of, she doesn't have any love in her heart. I really don't think she does. I don't think she loves her son. I don't think she loves her husband. I think that she, more than anything, wants to be them. And that's where the evil comes from. That's where the greed comes from. And we see some really questionable behavior from her. Especially, there's a scene in this that is very Freudian in nature, and there's some heavy sexuality implied between she and her son. And it's just, yeah, it's very chilling. Great film, though, I think. It's really well done. I love how it has this kind of sweeping American sort of feel to it, but at the same time is quite off-kilter and a little dizzying. But that's another example of I can't imagine anybody else playing that role for that time. Anton Chigurh from No Country for Old Men. He is not direct, he's extremely vague, which requires us to think about him more once the movie ends. His persona is open for interpretation. We have to consider what makes him evil and why he thinks he has to behave this way. So, this is one that pops up a lot. Anton Chigurh is one of the most famous villains, I think, of modern cinema, particularly in my generation. I will agree with you that I think that he is incredibly intimidating. I think that Javier Bardem's performance for the film is astoundingly good. He's terrifying. He's absolutely terrifying by doing very, very little. He is so intimidating, but he very rarely raises his voice. Javier Bardem is really good at playing sinister characters, particularly villains. And they did a great job with the look of him, especially with the haircut and all. It's very strange. It's quirky and it makes you feel uneasy, and it's certainly a staple. I'll admit I haven't seen No Country for Old Men in a long time, probably since I reviewed it, and that was like, I don't know, 4 years ago or something like that. But I struggle with the film. There are things about it that I think are absolutely masterful. I think it's one of the most brilliantly directed movies the Coen brothers have ever done. However, my main issue with it does kind of come from the Anton Chigurh character. You say here that his persona is open to interpretation, and that's fine, but I do feel like he's a bit overly simplified in a film that is really trying to contemplate a lot philosophically, and it is kind of a meditation on society, the darkness of society, and you have a lot of really interesting ideas being pondered here, but it just doesn't all come together, and I think partially the character of Anton Chigurh kind of stifles that because it doesn't open things up. I know I'm majorly in the minority on that, but it's always just been my opinion. Maybe if I watched it again, I'd feel differently. But as I've grown older, I find myself less interested in the Anton Chigurh character and more interested in other areas of the film. That, not to say again that I'm not interested in Bardem's performance. I love watching it. It's an incredible performance, but just the character. I always feel like they mastered kind of the black comedy and the tragedy and all of that the best, found the balance of all of that in Fargo. The balance of humor and satire, and as I said, real darkness, brutality, just a stronger piece. But I do understand why you pick him as as one of your favorites. It's a common choice. Lots to choose from. I'd probably pick a Lon Chaney villain from an obscure silent film, or Peter Lorre in M. Ooh, that's a good one. To give this a shot of being something you might actually read, I'll say Norman Bates from Psycho. There is no evil character more conflicted in cinema, which makes him such an icon. He seems harmless as a fly until you take a shower. And Anthony Perkins is too perfect as Norman. Too perfect. Actually, honestly, if you had said Peter Lorre from M, I would have picked this anyway, because that is talk about a chilling performance. Holy shit. In a lot of ways, much more dark and more terrifying than Norman Bates. But I do agree with your actual choice here, Norman Bates. And, I do have to pick that one. Just because Norman Bates... Yeah, I think a lot of it comes down to how he was interpreted for the movie. From what I understand, the character of Norman in the book is supposed to be really kind of repulsive, ugly, a guy who's like, fat, has his gut hanging out and all that, maybe balding a little bit, I think, I don't know. But yeah, I think making him much more like somebody you'd want to root for is kind of the key to the film. Because this whole movie is about shifting perspectives. Like the first, third of it, you're following Marion, and then all of a sudden you're following Norman, and then you're following the, the sister and the boyfriend. So and especially that first half of the movie, I think it's really key for you to feel uncomfortable when it's shifting from Marion and all of a sudden she's dead, and now you're following the killer. And I think you need to, with that character, there has to be an opening where you kind of fall into him and attach yourself to him in some sort of fashion. And that's what Anthony Perkins gives us. He is wonderful in the role, perfectly chosen, because he is the opposite of what they describe in the book. He is handsome, and he's kind of awkward, but like charming. Like, admittedly, had I been the one to walk into that hotel, I'd be like, he's kind of cute. And I see why Marion wants to be sweet to him. There's something very intriguing about him. But that scene in the parlor, the back room where she's eating dinner, is one of the most spectacular, one of the most brilliant, I think, villain reveals, ever. But the way it builds is absolutely brilliant. And Anthony Perkins, he just slowly is turning, and you start to feel more and more uneasy. And there's just this one little moment where she starts talking about the mother, and it's just a little shift. But then he can pull it back and be really sweet and kind of, aw shucks, kind of geeky. But never gimmicky. It feels absolutely authentic until we realize just how disturbed he is. But he's also a very tragic character. Like you sense that there's a lot of repression, of course, sexual repression. He has a slightly effeminate quality to him. So I think there's a lot going on in him that will never truly be revealed, at least in this movie. And that is what is so unique, as how much he can infer. Gonna have to go with Alan Rickman as Hans Gruber in Die Hard. He's witty, erudite, and always 3 steps ahead of everyone. Rickman was mesmerizing, and a role many thought he couldn't pull off. He reportedly approached the character as a genuine protagonist, which gave Gruber a touch of hope and authenticity that made you almost root for him. In the backdrop of 80s machismo, he is as much an anti-villain as Bruce Willis was an anti-hero, and the dual contrast worked beautifully in that film. Yeah, you nailed it. That is the appeal of Die Hard. It's certainly the appeal for me. The 1980s, of course, was the time for like excess and just, overstuffed materialism, and everything had to be machismo, and especially 1980s movies, you get a lot of like Arnold Schwarzenegger and a lot of like Sylvester Stallone. But then in this movie, you get such a strange contrast to that with Bruce Willis, who is just kind of like this normal guy, this like working class dude who has all these issues. He's struggling with his wife, obviously. He's kind of primitive. He doesn't know how to work a computer to save his life. And a lot of the time he's just kind of making stuff up as he goes along. And that is the appeal to him because he's always on his toes. And same with Hans Gruber. He's such an unusual character, and he is one of the great villains. And I think the two of them, the way that they play the characters is a huge reason why Die Hard is the classic that it is, and for me, one of the great Hollywood action movies. Hans Gruber, though, I always like to say, he's not seen chewing, he's seen devouring. Alan Rickman just revels in every moment of that performance, and you say he approached it like a protagonist. I think most of the best performances approach their characters as though they are protagonists. When I'm talking about when they're playing antagonists, a lot of the times that's where the authenticity comes from. And yes, Alan Rickman, there's something about just the way he delivers the lines, his dialect, and just, I don't know, it's very, very strange. Like, I've never heard anybody talk quite like that. And that is kind of what's so funny about it. He's very elegant and clearly educated and sophisticated, in great contrast, of course, to John McClane. And that's why I think they work so well together, as like a antagonist-protagonist duo. And unfortunately, I don't think that any of the other Die Hards came even close to having a villain on that caliber. So Alan Rickman, may he rest in peace. He was a joy in that movie. And that is the video, you guys. Thank you so much for watching. I have a new website. I'm going to do a video next week talking more about that, but you can check that out below. All of my Patreon supporters are here. The link to support that is below, as well as my links for social media. If you would like to watch more videos, they are here, and you can subscribe if you'd like. Catch you next time.